Prime Video currently has some great sci-fi flicks like The Terminator, the original Highlander, Children of Men, Escape from New York, Pandorum, and a lot of terrible looking ones that are in fact pretty terrible. Some are not though, some are actually pretty great. In this video, I'm going to quickly recommend 20 twisted sci-fi flicks included with your Prime subscription. Thanks to Dream by Beam for sponsoring this video. But I'm actually going to start with something that's not a movie. It is the newest sci-fi series to hit Prime Video. It's actually an anthology series titled Secret Level, and this is from the same producers as Love, Death, and Robots over on Netflix, and it has quite a bit in common with it, but it's also fairly different. This is from director Tim Miller, who's probably most famous for the first Deadpool movie, and each episode is based on a popular video game. The first episode is actually Dungeons and Dragons, but there's a Pac-Man episode that's really kind of bizarre in its concept, but it's just eye-popping and really cinematic. So I recommend starting with that one, but also episode 8 is based on Armored Core and features a stunningly realistic Keanu Reeves CG character, and his performance is great. Like, it comes through the animation incredibly well in this thing, and it's really fast-paced. It's one of my favorite ones in the series. Oh, and episode 4, based on Unreal Tournament, is pretty awesome, but there's 15 episodes in total. They vary in how long they are. They're all visually stunning. Some of them I found to be kind of surprisingly dopey given the content. But my first movie recommendation here, my number 19 pick, is a bizarre one that actually stars Michael Rappaport as a man who believes that he has superpowers.
Pretty solid wall, huh?
Yeah.
Or it seems that way to most people, but the truth is,
or rather, he's taking an experimental drug that leads him to believe that he's got superpowers. Now, there are a lot of movies about, vigilantes dressing up as superheroes, and there's some that are quite good. I love Super, directed by James Gunn. Kick-Ass is maybe a more obvious example, but this is an interesting little indie flick. We're talking micro budget and a great performance from Michael Rappaport. Like, I always love his little characters, but he's rarely leading a movie like this. You can tell from the footage I've showed you here, it does look fairly low quality. It's got some years on it, and again, was done on a fairly micro budget. But if you can look past that, again, this is a cool flick in that very niche genre.
Who are you? I come from a future that will no longer exist.
Await Further Instructions is a real creepy one. On a list of twisted movies, not all of them are this dark and twisted. This actually all takes place in one small flat where a family has gathered for Christmas, so it's a lot of family members in a small place that are suddenly trapped, cannot leave, and a message pops up on the screen that says await further instructions. Now, that simple setup actually sets off a pretty intense drama between the family, but this movie gets kind of insanely dark. It's a weird one. But for people who like weird movies, it is a cool little horror Christmas gem. It's not quite a Christmas horror movie. There's not a whole lot of Christmas in this movie, but, it qualifies, I guess. Now, believe it or not, my next one is a rom-com, sort of, but it is science fiction, and the science fiction element is kind of what's twisted about this one. Other than that, it's actually a fairly sweet movie. It's titled Timer. This takes place in a world where everyone, or at least people who decide to purchase one, have a timer that's going to count down to when they're going to meet the person that they're, are meant to be with, the one, so to speak. And the concept alone is kind of what makes this movie work. It's interesting from the jump, and the movie exploits it pretty well. It makes a lot of good points. And it's a very low-budget movie, but it's funny, it's sweet, it's charming, and not in a Netflixy romantic comedy kind of way either. And honestly, for a rom-com done at this budget level, it's surprisingly interesting. All right, my next one is actually a cult classic, but I'm still going to try to nudge some folks towards this one. People who maybe never would have looked at this one. Death Race 2000 is a fun flick, even if it's kind of messed up. So not only does this star Sylvester Stallone, I mean, not a cameo, I mean, he's in it a decent amount, but it's a minor character. But David Carradine is kind of like the lead bad guy in this, and it's about this death race that goes across the country. It's vehicular warfare, and they get points not just by killing off other racers, but pedestrians as well. And this is not the only movie where people technically get points for hitting pedestrians with cars, believe it or not. Now, the next one I'm recommending, I need to start off by saying that this is a famously bad movie, and that is the only reason I'm really recommending it. Now, it's based on a classic book, and not only did they butcher it, but they kind of did it on purpose. The Island of Dr. Moreau has some screen legends in it. You've got Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando in a horrific representation of the Island of Dr. Moreau. Now, there is a great documentary on the making of this movie. It's titled Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, and it too is included with Prime, and here I'm recommending you watch these as a double feature. Probably actually better to watch the documentary, even though it is going to feature some spoilers. I think you'll have more of a laugh while watching the movie if you do it that way, but you do it the way you want to do it. I loved the documentary as just kind of a movie nerd. It was a fun watch, and retroactively, so is the movie. It is just, it's a wild one. Next up, I've got a Korean flick that is kind of like a mix between Con Air and Predator. Project Wolf Hunting probably sounds cooler in Korea, but it's not as good as Predator or Con Air, but I gotta warn you, this is an insanely bloody movie. I mean, the movie's got scenes in it that are bloodier than the opening club scene in Blade. You know what I'm talking about. If you saw Headshot or The Night Comes For Us, it's that brutal. So do not watch this one if you're even the slightest bit squeamish. I'm telling you, I watch a lot of violent stuff, and this one was pushing it for me. But the setup here is you've got a bunch of criminals being transported on this big cargo ship, and vicious criminals too, like brutal murderers are included in this bunch, and they take over the ship in a ruthless fashion. And that's about half the movie, and then once the criminals are running the ship, they realize there's something else on this ship that is way more dangerous than they are. And that is where the sci-fi stuff comes in. I'm gonna say it again though. I was shocked at how bloody this movie is. It is going to be too intense for most viewers, but if that sounds like you, this is a wild one from South Korea that I was shocked by. My next one's interesting. It's got a kind of a huge cast. You've got Michael Shannon, Nicholas Hoult, and Elle Fanning in a Dust Bowl-ish post-apocalyptic sci-fi flick, which sounds like kind of like top billing stuff, but this is a pretty small little indie flick. It's got very little special effects in it, so don't go into it expecting like a stunning sci-fi movie. The movie does have some great cinematography to it, but it does feel much more like a Dust Bowl type movie that just kind of happens to have some robotics in the mix. And it's a pretty good story. It's a star-crossed lover kind of a story as well. Nothing mind-blowing, but aesthetically, I actually really like this movie, and all the actors involved, they do a good job telling a pretty good story here. All right, we're gonna go to, late 80s, early 90s with my next two picks, starting with Pierce Brosnan in Lawnmower Man. This is kind of like a virtual reality-based version of Flowers for Algernon. It's actually based on a Stephen King book, but my understanding is they kind of butchered it to make this movie. And this movie, as well, is not really famous for being good. It scores kind of below average on a lot of ratings, but aesthetically, it's got this kind of funky, weird 90s vibe, and it goes to some kind of goofy places. This is not one I strongly recommend for folks who've maybe never seen it, but if this is one that you used to enjoy, it can be pretty fun to revisit it. If you recall, a lot of the Stephen King adaptations at this time were fairly cheesy, especially when you go back and watch them now. Next up though, we've got one from 1989 that's kind of like a cross between Alien and The Abyss, even though this one is also not quite as good as either of those two examples. But in Leviathan, sci-fi legend Peter Weller leads this team of divers in this undersea base, very much like The Abyss, except they encounter something kind of alien, very much like Alien. In fact, this movie kind of rips off Alien. And it's not a total failure at it either. It actually does Alien pretty well. And you know, Alien's a masterpiece. Like, it's not gonna be as good as Alien, but if you're a fan of the Alien franchise and you've somehow never seen Leviathan, you definitely need to check it out. I mean, it's much more of like a splatterfest 80s horror movie than it is like a real, you know, gem of a sci-fi flick the way that Alien is, but still, a blast to watch, and it's got some gross out effects in it too. Now, we're almost at the start of a brand new year, and if one of your New Year's resolutions in 2025 is to start getting better sleep, then today's sponsor, Dream by Beam, can help you with that. It's been helping me anyway, and that's because it's a drink mix that is loaded with the best sleep-promoting ingredients. It's a powder that you mix with just a little bit of warm milk or water about 30 minutes to maybe an hour before bedtime. I tend to enjoy mine about halfway through my last movie of the day. Dream has been clinically proven to help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. And I'm not someone who has chronic sleep problems, and I still enjoy Dream, and that's because it's not a heavy product. I mean, as a 40-year-old man with 2 kids, I have multiple reasons I might need to wake up in the middle of the night routinely, and on nights when I drink Beam before bed, I notice if I have to wake up, I fall right back to sleep comfortably, but most importantly, I wake up feeling refreshed with zero grogginess, which is what you want with a sleep aid. You want to wake up fresh. You don't want to wake up feeling tired. It defeats the purpose of a good night of sleep. Dream is available in a CBD version and a non-CBD version. I have been enjoying the non-CBD version. Dream also comes in a variety of flavors. This one here is the original. It's like a cinnamon cocoa. It's really nice, and like I said, luxurious. There's also a chocolate brownie that's like extra chocolatey, chocolate mint, chocolate peanut butter, and it's gluten-free, dairy-free with no added sugars, no GMOs, and no artificial flavors. And for a limited time, my viewers get to take advantage of the New Year's sale and receive up to 40% off site-wide when they go to the link in the video description, or use this QR code. Just don't forget to use my code FLICK. Again, that's going to get you up to 40% off site-wide on something that is definitely going to help you get better sleep in 2025. So be sure to check out the link either with the QR code or in the description. It's a great deal on a product I actually really enjoy. But speaking of things I enjoy, let's get back to the movies on this list. Next up, we've got another adaptation from a famous writer, but this one is actually a pretty good one and a bizarre one. It's actually based on Dostoevsky's The Double, a book that inspired a lot of movies, Fight Club being one of them. Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal, that's another kind of loose adaptation. It actually came out around the same time as The Double, which stars Jesse Eisenberg. This is more of a faithful adaptation, but it's got a funky style to it as well. I really liked it. The style reminded me of Terry Gilliam's Brazil quite a bit, actually. It's kind of a mind bender that goes in some funky directions where you're not really going to grasp all of it on the first viewing or even multiple viewings, but still like a funky, cool, and seemingly like somewhat faithful adaptation of a classic book. It's kind of cool stuff.
Look at me! Look at him! He stole my face!
But I've got another one starring sci-fi legend Peter Weller. If you don't know why I've said that twice, he plays RoboCop, Naked Lunch, Buckaroo Banzai, legendary stuff, but Screamers stands out as one of his more underrated flicks. The script here was actually written by Dan O'Bannon, who's most famous for Alien, but it's based on a book by legendary sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick, and it's like a mid-90s monster movie. All these Marines are kind of marooned on this remote planet during this big intergalactic war. Most of that doesn't matter. What happens, though, is they're trapped on this planet, and there are these little subterranean robots that have become sentient. They're like little security robots, kind of like attack dogs that can zip around under the ground. As part of some security security force, but now they've got like a mind of their own and they're hunting people down. And the movie's filled with all these cool practical effects of these little things zipping around underground, kind of like Tremors, except they're small little robots that can kill you quick. They've got these blades and everything. They make this weird sound, which is why they call the movie Screamers. If I haven't sold you on it by now, the movie's probably not for you, but if that sounds like something you'd love to go back and revisit like 30 years later, it's a cool flick. Now, I have recommended a movie titled The Signal from 2014 multiple times on this channel. Today, I'm recommending one I rarely see available. It is from 2007 and has a very different plot. But in this, The Signal, this strange signal starts to come over everyone's TV sets and they start to lose their minds. Kind of like The Crazies, but not exactly. You wouldn't quite call this a zombie movie. If anything, it actually features like little vignettes, little kind of short stories, but not quite. Like there's a through narrative. It's got a strange structure, but some really twisted stuff happens in this one, including one thing with like a bunch of pesticide. But it's also like a clever mind bender. You're trying to figure out what's happening before like everyone completely loses their mind. And this was done on like a micro budget and just has a cool vibe to it, like from beginning to end. It's one of those gems I discovered on streaming like right when Netflix started streaming movies, and it's kind of elusive. It's not always available. It's on Prime right now, and I recommend it if you clicked on this video wanting to watch like a truly twisted sci-fi flick. Now, my next recommendation is technically two movies. They are both anime, but they're just bizarre, twisted sci-fi with a really slick aesthetic. However, I recommend Wicked City much more strongly than its sequel, Demon City, even though both of them are included with Prime right now. Wicked City just has the cooler aesthetic, the music, the look of it, the way it's cut together and animated. It is just like a polished gem. I love the aesthetic of this movie. It's almost like if Michael Mann directed a dark anime movie. It's cool stuff. But both movies take place in a future where humans and these demon-like creatures are kind of trying to coexist. They have like treaties and that type of stuff. But the demons begin consuming humans and like all hell breaks loose, and it ends up going into like these dark fantasy directions by the end. But most of it has this slick 1980s aesthetic. Just like, again, it's just eye candy. The sequel has a similar aesthetic, but I feel like kind of a wacky dub job, like weird character voices they picked for the English dub on it, almost to like a comical point. And the plot and everything's not bad. It's just like, you know, it seems like much weaker sauce than the original to me. But next up, I've got a trilogy I'm recommending, a cult classic trilogy. And with this one, if you're interested in watching the first one, if you love it, by all means, pursue the other two. If you can't get into this one in the first 30 minutes, just do yourself a favor. Bail out. It's not going to get any better if you're not digging The Toxic Avenger. Now, these movies are just a ton of fun. This is the other movie, or at least the first one is, where people are earning points for hitting pedestrians with cars. It's dark stuff, yes, but it's done purely for laughs in this movie. It's just everything about this movie is ridiculous, but on purpose. It's all done in good fun. I mean, it's the type of movie where like everyone would lose their careers if they made this today for multiple reasons. I mean, just you name it, they cross the line in this movie. And again, all in good fun. It is just a violent revenge gore fest that is just, again, total blast to watch if you're into that sort of thing. And I'm into that sort of thing. All right, but next up, we've got like a real mind bender. Another one, though, based on a book by Philip K. Dick. This one, however, is actually directed by Richard Linklater, who's probably most famous for Dazed and Confused, but he's done so many great movies, this being one of them. Now, at the time that this released, this was cutting-edge technology to film something and then make it look animated like this. They could do this for like almost no money today, relatively, but it was a whole process then. But this movie's got some heavy hitters in it. I mean, you've got Robert Downey Jr. playing a whack job, Woody Harrelson playing an even wackier job, but Keanu Reeves plays the main character. Winona Ryder's got a little role in this. There's like this dangerous new drug on the market. You got a cop kind of investigating it, and the movie features like multiple reality slips. That's kind of maybe the reason to do it in this animation style, but it's a heady kind of movie. It's one you got to think about while you're watching it pretty actively, but it's one you got to think about afterwards as well.
26 rooms across.
17,576 rooms.
Cube is just a classic horror movie that still holds up today. The effects hold up fairly well. The concept is still interesting. You follow a group of strangers who all wake up in these rooms in this giant cube. Basically a maze, but it's a giant cube and it's booby-trapped. Every single room has a new booby trap and they have to figure out how to disarm them. It's like a giant escape room before, escape rooms were really a thing. It's bloody, it's gory, but it's a cult classic, and they made a whole rash of sequels. Several of them are actually included with Prime, but none of them are as good as the first. My next pick is a must-watch for vampire movie lovers. If you've somehow yet to see Stakeland, they have Stakeland and Stakeland 2, both included with Prime right now. I strongly recommend Stakeland. If you love the movie, then the sequel is worth watching, but it's not nearly on the same level in terms of story or even production. The first one takes place in a post-apocalyptic future. It's very much like The Walking Dead, except instead of zombies, they're vampires. And they're zombie-ish type vampires, so it's kind of a cross between both, and in my opinion, it's the best of both worlds. If you were ever into The Walking Dead, even if you only watched it for a few seasons, I strongly recommend this movie. It's every bit as good as I think the show was. It's a shame the sequel's not quite as good, but I still do recommend it for folks who love the first one. Now, there are some other movies included with Prime that easily could have fit on this list. Movies like Automata with Antonio Banderas and Dylan McDermott playing like a really good bad guy. It's a great like dystopian cyberpunk type thing.
Stop!
What the hell just happened?
Radius is about a guy who essentially kills everyone who comes within like a 50-foot radius. They just like drop dead. That's a really interesting movie. And Turbo Kid is a super cool throwback flick. I would have put any one of those on the list, but I've talked about them enough on recent videos. If it's your first time watching, definitely consider clicking that subscribe button if you love getting movie recommendations like these. I put out 1 or 2 videos just like this one every single week to keep you updated on the latest things available on, Prime, Netflix, Max, all the big ones and the free ones. My next pick is not that old, but it is a callback to classic 1980s body horror movies like The Thing. If you love those, you have to see The Void. Now, if you're easily disgusted, do yourself a favor and do not watch this movie. I've got plenty of other things I've recommended for you on this list. This is easily the most dark and twisted movie on this list. It goes into like H.P. Lovecraft directions, but it features not only good practical effects, but gobs of practical effects by the time you get to the climax. It is loaded with them in a way that takes you by surprise. Even with me saying that, this movie is going to take you by surprise with where it goes. I mean, a great recommendation at Halloween, not such a good recommendation here at Christmas time, but hey, you clicked on a video about twisted sci-fi movies, and this is a dark one. As a close runner-up for darkness, my number 1 pick, another cult classic that is just not only visually stunning, but interesting from beginning to end, even when you know what's going to happen, in Dark City. This features this like film noir kind of style, but it's also got this dark and moody Matrix-y kind of vibe. Even in the Matrix itself, when they were in the Matrix, especially the first one, it had kind of this noir type look to it with the way they're filming everything. That's what Dark City looks like, and the mystery starts right from the very beginning, and it's all pretty moody and macabre, but there's some pretty intense sci-fi fantasy elements at play here as well. And it's one of those movies where you're going to uncover multiple mysteries all the way throughout, and then still kind of get your mind blown by the end, especially if you've never seen this movie. If you made it to this point in the video, make it the first one you watch. And it may seem obvious it being my first recommendation, but really, it's a very strong recommendation for folks who haven't seen it, and still a strong one for folks who maybe forgot how solid of a flick this actually is. But that is the list. Don't forget to go check out that link to Dream down in the video description if you want to get that discount. But I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this twisted sci-fi list, and you will see me on the next one.